Hey guys, King here with PrepSmartKitchen.com, and today we're going to go over how to use alternatives to salt with things like oyster sauce and soy sauce. To get you started, this is kind of the ingredients we're going to use. Over here we have some chicken breast. We have a pasilla pepper right here, or poblano, kind of whichever you want to call it. This is similar to a bell pepper, might have just a tiny kick of heat in it, but nothing too much. We have some broccolini. I think this kind of cooks up on a stovetop easier than just regular old broccoli. We have some green onions instead of regular onions, some minced ginger, some oyster sauce, and some garlic paste. We're also going to throw in a bit of kimchi. Now, when I was grocery shopping and putting this together, I didn't really know what I wanted to make. I just kind of wanted to create something that could highlight oyster sauce. So here's the oyster sauce. It's pretty smoky and has a sweet flavor while still adding saltiness. Next, I'm using basmati rice. And normally for meal prep, you can probably get away with just about 2 cups. That'll last you about 5 meals. So I don't measure a lot with rice. I tend to do the, put your finger in the water and, measure up to your knuckle sort of thing. But when I am measuring out kind of like the initial amount, it does help to just kind of throw it into a measuring glass real quick. And then, from here, you can make sure that you are getting the right amount for the week. And then when it comes to the water, I just kind of eyeball it and test it out, which you'll see in a minute. So this is when we start cleaning the rice, and it's pretty easy. You just put it in your pot and fill up with some water and kind of run your hands around it. It doesn't take too much. Sometimes you might get a little carried away and start playing with the rice a bit more than you need to. Then I just strain it out in a quick sieve. You can also just put your hands over the rice and just kind of empty the water if you don't have a sieve. Just makes things a little more convenient for me. And then when I'm using a faucet, I do kind of like having the multi-spray rather than like a regular stream, because a regular stream you're not really going to saturate it with enough liquid. And then I just repeat this process maybe 2-3 times. You don't need to do it that much. I just kind of get carried away sometimes. All right, so here's how you measure the water with your fingers. You're just going to put a small amount of water, just kind of raise it above the rice itself. And then you're going to measure and make sure that the water line is kind of at the bottom of your knuckle. And then you just kind of adjust the amount of water and depending on the kind of rice you have, and then just do it again. Make sure that's still around your knuckle. Next, you're going to place it onto the stove and then just kind of bring it to a slow simmer. Now we're going to start with preparing all the vegetables and things like that. This tends to be the longest portion of cooking. So the better you get with a knife, the faster it will go. Here we're starting with a pasilla pepper, also sometimes known as a poblano. I like this a little bit more than bell pepper, just because I think it has just a slight bit of heat to it that, not a ton, but just a little bit. And it just kind of adds a bit more character than a bell pepper normally does. Bell pepper is really fun if you're doing something kind of like really bright. And this isn't really, you can make this dish bright if you want, but, we're going to be coating it in this oyster sauce. So it's not totally going to, bring out those sort of flavors. We're trying to showcase something else here, which is kind of the dark, sweet, smoky flavors, and how that creates salt. Here, you see what I'm doing is kind of flattening out the peppers, and then I'm just going to julienne it, which means cut into rectangles and then into strips. And I like to kind of keep it into strips. I don't totally go into like cubes or squares or rectangles. Just kind of like nice long strips, I think cook up well. And they're going to match the shape of the other vegetables you see here, because we also have some green onion, and we have some broccolini. And if we can kind of get everything to kind of match the same sort of shape, have the same consistency, you're going to have something a bit more uniform near the end. And so here you see me rocking with the broccolini. I like cooking with broccolini more than just regular broccoli. One, it's a lot easier to put into a frying pan and like really saute it. If you're trying to saute just regular old broccoli, the bulbous head of it is really big and flourful, I guess I don't even know if that's a word, but because of that, you're not really getting a whole lot of surface tension with the
pan, it's not really cooking up right. You're going to want to use broccoli more if you're doing a roast. Maybe, I don't know, put it in a stew if you want to try that. Or really if you're just using an oven. Broccolini, it lends itself a lot better to stovetop cooking. You can see it's kind of the same thing. It's just longer. It's a bit flatter, more dense, I guess. And this allows you to just kind of heat it up in a skillet like you would other vegetables. So the last part of this, trifecta of green is green onions, and you see me moving the very ends there. I like using green onions in lieu of just regular onions, especially if we're sautéing on top. They're softer. You don't have to wait forever to cook them down. They're not as pungent. So if you're just trying to get a little bit of an onion flavor in there without having these big old chunky pieces of harsh onion, it's gonna kind of tone it down and match the consistency a little bit better. They kind of fry up so they can get a different texture than regular onions do. You're not really caramelizing them. You're just sort of heating them up and letting them mingle with everything else. Kind of like these other two ingredients here. So it's a nice way to add a different, that kind of same onion quality in a different format, I guess you could say. And then I like to keep the kind of green ends for the stovetop cooking. Next, we're going to bring up the stove to a medium heat. I'm going to add some canola oil. I don't suggest using olive oil. It's going to bring the wrong flavors. If you want, you can try coconut oil, but I like canola in this case just because it's a neutral. Next, we're going to add the vegetables to the pan and start sauteing them. Make sure to stir them into the oil quickly. You don't want to end up burning them, because they're not mixed in well enough yet. So just try and, hurry up and do the best you can. Next, we're going to add one of my favorites, which is cooking wine. This lets us add more hydration to the vegetables so you can prevent them from burning still. You don't want to rely on cooking oil to be the only thing, preventing burns. When you add this kind of wine, this vinegar, it kind of keeps them fresh, and you can kind of heat them up and soften them a bit while adding, this kind of nice flavor. I like the white wine. Again, it's pretty bright. You can use red wine. I don't think it'll match this particular recipe, but they both impart a certain flavor, and it's pretty nice. Here I'm adding some garlic paste. It's a puree, but I usually prefer minced from a jar. And then next I'm going to be putting in some Chinese five spice. Now this is star anise, cloves, cinnamon, Szechuan, and fennel seeds. And if you haven't cooked with this before, what will probably immediately stand out to you is the Szechuan, the peppercorn. It's not actual pepper, it's a citrus. And it creates this sort of numbing effect. And if you have it in large quantities, like in a maratang, then you can really notice it because it's going to just overwhelm your mouth with sensation. It's really sought after by a lot of people in China, but to the Western audience, it might seem a bit new. And if you use Chinese five spice, that's the particular spice in it that you're going to notice probably right away. We're going to hit it with some soy sauce next. This is basically just liquid salt. You can add it in lieu of regular salt, and you'll still season the food. You'll still, up the sodium level of it. So it's a great substitute in that regard. It's also used all over the world. I see it pop up in a lot of Caribbean food, like Jamaican jerk chicken, things like that. It's pretty common. I'm pretty sure you can find it in some American barbecues also. So it's not just Chinese cooking in parts of all over Asia. You can experiment a lot with this ingredient. All right, here comes the big boy. Lee Kun Lee. This is one of my favorite ingredients. It's oyster sauce. Don't let this scare you. This scares people. It's kind of weird to look at an oyster and to think that it's been turned into a sauce. I mean, it's like we don't have chicken sauce or beef sauce, but we have oyster sauce. I'm not entirely sure how the oyster is turned into this or what the process totally is. I tried looking it up once. It just kind of went over my head. But it doesn't really taste like oysters, at least not like raw oysters. Some people might see some similarities between this and smoked oysters, but it's smoky. There's a smokiness to it. It's also really sweet, so it mixes really well because it adds kind of a sweet and salty flavor, And then the soy sauce again just kind of seasons it and, you know, makes it a bit saltier. And then you can really tone that down with hoisin sauce, and you know, the sweetness and kind of the tartness, sourness of that kind of really rounds it all out. I'm not using hoisin sauce here because I kind of want to just highlight the saltiness without using salt. And that's kind of what we got here, and it really kind of simmers well. Now I'm going to start cutting up the chicken, and what I usually do is just julienne it. This is if you don't know what a julienne is, this is kind of a good way to see it. Julienne is basically, you're just cutting it in like long strips, and you do that over and over, and it kind of breaks the chicken down, or whatever you're cooking, kind of into uniform pieces. So if you want, you know, long strips or small cubes, or you know, really flat pieces, this is a great way to do that. And fortunately for you guys, you know, I put my camera on the left side of the cutting board, so you can't see the other side of my hand where the chicken is. So I hope that you still understand the idea here. You can see over there, yeah, it's kind of this long strip. And then I just sort of place those all in a single pile, turn it sideways like that. And then we're going to just start cutting them the short side. And so we're going to lay these long strips and just cut them into little tiny cubes. And we'll have pretty uniform pieces because of it. So you'll see here, I'm just going to take a little chunk at a time. Depending on the size of your cutting board and how much raw chicken you want to throw around. You can take larger cuts at it. I'm just trying to manage things and keep it clean. But we're just going to go through this and eventually break down the entire pile right there. Now we're getting on to the final step of it all. We're just going to start adding the chicken after it's been all cut up. You can see it's in nice little cubes there. So it's going to be pretty easy to stir around, kind of get it in between the nooks and the crannies of the vegetables. We really want the chicken to pick up, you know, the flavors that we've created, which is going to be the oyster sauce, the soy sauce, you know, the 5-spice, the garlic, and the vegetables. We're going to get that all kind of coated on there so that as the chicken breast cooks up, it's going to absorb those flavors and keep them locked in. Remember, we're not using salt, so we also kind of have to take mind of the chemistry of salt is also missing here. Here's me screwing up the rice. I kind of forgot I was cooking it, so I had to rush over and save what I could. Back to the chicken, you can see it's starting to cook in now. You know, the sides are starting to cook up a bit. It's getting to where we want it to be. And the vegetables are also still cooking, so you can see the broccolini is really starting to soften. This is making it easier for the chicken to kind of get the surface tension it needs with the heating element, and also kind of lets the flavors sort of bleed out a bit more. So we're just going to leave it here and just stir occasionally as needed. And you can see with the rice in the back, I turned off the stove, gave it a good mix, and then I put the lid back on. Basically, what happens with this rice, or with any rice really, is sometimes the bottom of the pan can heat up or stay hot too long, and so it's like you're searing the bottom layer of the rice, but the majority of the rice itself still hasn't really completely steamed through yet and softened. So you get this undercooked rice, but you get this overcooked kind of bottom half. So what I'm doing here is trying to not increase the heat, but still retain it long enough so that, you know, the steam that's still inside can kind of capture and still cook through the rice a bit, so I don't have to, you know, end up burning the bottom. The bottom's not burnt yet, but it does get crispy, and you'll notice it get crispy. So trying to prevent that from happening. The real issue here was I just kind of left it unattended and didn't really stay mindful to how hot the pot was getting, and also forgot the lid. The lid's not always necessary, but in this case it would have cooked a little bit better if I made those two adjustments. So we're approaching the finish line here. You can see the chicken's fully cooked through. If you're worried about the chicken, just put your spatula through a piece and check to see if it's all white or a little bit of pink left. So we're gonna hit this with some sesame oil as the very last thing. This is just kind of like a finisher, kind of like some people have like finishing salt or even like garnish. What sesame oil does is it adds this really nice kind of nuttiness to the flavor. And we're not gonna cook the oil off. We kind of want it to really coat everything and just keep it on. It also locks the flavors kind of behind it, so you can kind of retain a lot of the sauce. And it reduces a bit of friction between the ingredients. This is really nice, because when you with rice is sticky enough, so you just kind of let that take care of everything. Now I'm just going to start adding the rice to the dishes. I usually just add 1 spoonful at a time, and then just do that 2 times. And that's usually enough to get everything out of the pot. Like I mentioned earlier, the rice didn't come out so great. That was my bad. But I wanted to kind of show you guys what it does look like. So this is what I was able to salvage. I did kind of break up the rice a little bit. Just kind of accept that some of it's going to be a bit crunchy. You can kind of see the toasted one, that bottom right on the corner. Don't let it sway you too much. If it's kind of brown and crunchy like that, it's not bad. It's not like the end of the world. It's not ruined. The most important thing is that it's still edible. It's not burnt. Burnt, if it was all black and charred up and stuff, then it'd be an issue. But in this case, it's still doable. But if you run into that same issue, and you need to salvage it, this is probably what it's going to look like. This is basmati rice also, so it's not really sticky at all, which honestly was probably my one real big criticism of this meal. I think it would have done better with a shorter grain rice. To have that stickiness that I mentioned earlier, you see right here, it's just kind of sliding out of the pan. But the toastedness, lean into it. It's like sometimes, with bread or pizza, sometimes it gets a little extra toasted at one end, or, maybe burnt at the top, with bread at least. It'd still be okay for the most part. But that's what you should aim for if you need to salvage your rice. Now we're going to start adding the meat and vegetables to the rice. You'll see I put a bit of an indentation in the rice to kind of give the ingredients some like their own space to kind of sit, because this is going to be in the fridge, and you got to still heat it up and stir it and heat it up probably a second time. So we want to make sure that it's also smartly packed. Because we want to just press it into the rice. We kind of want to make this a bit more manageable, and not have it, rice just sticking to every single piece when we do heat it back up. Also, we're going to be putting kimchi on the other side, so we're already fighting for space with other ingredients here. And speaking of the devil, we got the kimchi right here. This is some basic, just store-bought kimchi. You've probably all seen it if you shop for kimchi on the West Coast. It claims to be spicy. However, if you're making your own kimchi, more power to you. That's pretty awesome. Kimchi is great. It's basically just spicy sauerkraut. Really, really great probiotic for your gut. It's eaten all the time in Korea, and in a lot of different forms too. Not like this always. They'll have like radish in different shapes and sizes. I've had kimchi over there that wasn't even spicy. It was just regular like fermentation and nothing else really in it. But it was the minimalism of it that I really enjoyed. I think it was called mul kimchi, something like that. And here we go, a great way to cook chicken and rice without using salt. Say we have oyster sauce and soy sauce, some kimchi on the side, and a nice bed of rice underneath.